Hello, and welcome to Remembering Together, the LMJ's podcast. I'm your host, Matt Harold. Each month, we explore the many ways Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia touch our lives, from personal stories of families affected by this disease to the ongoing efforts to find a cure. Join us as we raise awareness, share support, and learn together about the impact of Alzheimer's on nearly 7 million people worldwide. Let's remember together and work toward a future where no one faces this disease alone. Welcome to Remembering Together, the LMJ's Lost Souls podcast. Today is episode number 15, and I did not think we would make it past episode 1, so the fact that we're at 15, we're trying to do something here. Today is a really cool opportunity to have someone very special to Alzheimer's and dementia resources and also the cause all in itself. As we all know, if you've tuned in before, I love to talk, so let me introduce myself first. My name is Matt Harold. I am the Vice President of LMJ's Lost Souls Alzheimer's Fund, but my job here is to let our guests share all that they have to share with us today. So today I have someone who, fresh out of college, earned his stripes gaining experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and he followed that up with just 30 plus years in the food industry while being a business owner in the food industry. In the short time I've gotten to know this gentleman, I have learned about his current personal fight, and I'm honored to share the podcast studio with him today. So without further ado, I want to introduce Chris Gerardi, former owner of Home Helpers in Bloomingdale. Chris, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
Appreciate it. So kind of floor is yours a little bit. Tell us about you. Let our guests and audience and listeners know about who Chris is.
Well, thank you very much. Because I think my story is important. It had a lot to do with what's happening now in my life on a number of levels. So as Matt mentioned, I was in the food industry for a very long time and then helped start up a consulting business. And, of course, learned a lot about running business. But as I kind of tailed off in that career, I was starting to feel like I needed something else. And then something happened that gave me that opportunity. The business I was with in 2008 closed. Now, before that happened, I had a family experience that was part of why I wasn't feeling right when I was working at the business. And that involved my dad dying at a young age, 61, leaving my mom with Parkinson's disease, and she was alone, and I was the only sibling available to help, and so we took her into our home. We sold our home, sold her home. I already had 3 children under 6. A fourth came along soon after, and we cared for my mom for 12 years. And back then, this was late 80s, early 90s. We just felt that was the best thing to do for Mom. It wound up being very difficult for our family, though. And God bless my mom, she didn't ask for our help. We volunteered it. But caregiving someone who's declining from Parkinson's disease is a very difficult process. And I learned a valuable lesson from that because it kind of brought us to our knees in some respects, the responsibility and the difficulty in helping Mom. So I'd carried with that for many years, and then I lost my job in 2008. I felt I had to restart my career somewhere, but I didn't want to do what I was doing anymore. And I just felt this compelling factor in my heart and in my faith that maybe I could use my experience that we had in my family to help other people. So I did some investigation, spent about 3 months trying to figure things out, and decided that home care, non-medical home care, would be a great way for me to use my experience as a family member, but also have my own business and have some control over things that I didn't really have as much in my previous career. So I did the research. I bought a franchise called Home Helpers. And, for the first 4 or 5 years, we struggled. It's hard to get started in that business because you start with an area that you operate, but you don't have any clients that you're being handed when you buy the franchise. So we had to build from ground zero, and as we started adding clients, I realized myself that even though it was recommended not to, became a caregiver for male clients who wanted a guy. So I had a lot of hands-on experience in the home, helping people, and many of them had Alzheimer's. And so I learned really, from the ground up how to care for people. And then as we got larger and started to expand, I felt the need that we needed to help our caregivers be better in the home, particularly with Alzheimer's and dementia. So we trained them up on that. I became certified, and we trained them up, and our business grew. And so I had the blessing over that 14 years that I had the business. We helped over 600 families. And I would probably say that 60 to 70% of them had some type of dementia, and most of those were Alzheimer's. So the good news is that I had a great level of experience and knowledge of what the disease does and how to care for it. The bad news is that you see a very difficult situation in a home when someone has Alzheimer's and what happens to them over time, and it's heartbreaking and it's hard on the family. But I think that has all led me to where I'm at now. So I think I've had a great experience level to prepare me for the future.
It's awesome, and it's really two things that really stuck out to me. Number one, your past experience of what you went through with your mom, and too many times people go into business for the reason of whether you want to be a business owner, it sounds great, or the monetary side of it. You of course, we all need to make money,
right,
but you've chose the path you took based on the experience you had with your mom. That's number one. And number two, as a business owner myself, I love to hear that hands-on approach that you took. I look at too many times employees will say, my boss never did that, and now that you're going to tell me to do that, exactly. Not real easy to do. But when you've been in the trenches and done it, and then that coincides with, when you wrap up there with over 600 families there's a reason why it took time to build the business, like any business does. It takes time to build. Right. But when you get that number of families that you've helped, it's obviously because you knew what you were doing. And I firmly believe, and I'm not saying that's the only reason why, but your hands-on experience, I hope, grew a lot of respect with your employees, because that's huge.
Yeah, it did. I had a message that I could tell. And, I realized that this business wasn't about me. It was about providing care in the home and, treating my caregivers and other employees equally to the families that we helped. And so it was really, the heavy weight was pulled by the people in the trenches. I knew that. I know how hard it was for them and how diligent they were. And so I was just blessed to have that opportunity.
That's major props to you, because that's very, very, very noble to pick that business. Know a lot of people in the caregiving industry. Not easy at all. Whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's just general care, not an easy task to tackle there. Kind of go a little bit backwards, if you don't mind. Kind of tell us where you grew up, a little bit about family and that. I know we talked about your mom and dad, but
that's okay.
Yeah.
I was born here in Chicago, and on the near west side, kind of Garfield Park area, and in the early 60s, my dad moved us out to the suburbs, and so we planted in Lombard, went to Lombard East High School there, and had a great childhood. I was just thinking about that the other day. They were showing the first time they landed on the moon with what's going on now.
It's awesome.
I was on my bike and had to get home on my bike to watch it on black and white TV, right? So it was a great period of my life, and then I wound up going to college at a small school in Southern Illinois first, because I didn't have any money, and it was a work-study college where you worked and earned your room and board.
Awesome.
And then a couple of years there, and then I moved to Northern Illinois University. That's where I got my degree. It was in bio and chemistry, so I was thinking pharmaceutical world at the time, and that's how I got the job in pharmaceuticals as my first job. And it was a great job, but it was really hard, calling on doctors and things like that. But I learned a lot from it. And then I moved into the food industry and on the chemistry side, and then wound up moving into purchasing. And that's really was my primary career in the food industry, was in the purchasing department. And then I helped the startup company, who was essentially consultants for companies that were trying to be strategic in their purchasing. And that was that career I had for another 14, 15 years before that company closed in 2008.
Gotcha. So you talk, we're going to go on the education side. So being talked about where you went to college and all that, and then obviously what you do or what you did with home helpers and that. So talk about a little bit training and education for our listeners and how that, how important that is in terms of that home care space and that and what that entailed for you when you were in that world.
Incredibly important. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important training is. But the approach that we took over the course of time, which ultimately worked, because it's very hard to find fully trained, qualified caregivers, was we recruited on core values, because you can't train core values, okay? Being dependent, having a heart, looking for answers on your own, being self-managed in the home. Those require really very strong core values, and then we would train them up to learn the skills that you needed to be, a fully rounded caregiver. So, the little things like activities of daily living, maybe cooking, whatever. But in addition, doing more full work with them, both from a physical and emotional and an intellectual standpoint, in terms of creating a quality of life in the home. And that was really, the robust training that we tried to provide. You can get online caregiving training, and it's pretty good, but it still doesn't teach the essentials of being a valued human in the home, helping a family, okay? And kind of us then, as the company, surrounding that family with support, for the spouse or the adult sons and daughters. You have to support them too, because it's really a unit you're helping, not just one person.
Right, yeah. And the part of that, I can't train you to be a good human being, like that part, that's you or it's not you there. And then all the other things that kind of coincide is, and it's kind of what college is, it's the hot button topic right now, especially too. College is great, but that experience hands-on is what you can't teach really in a classroom or on a web or whatever it is.
That's right.
And then, as you said, it's a unit. Too many times when people talk about, especially Alzheimer's and dementia, talk about the person.
Right.
And, there's many people who that person may not know what's going on at that point, but it's their family that is burdening a lot more and the person is still burdening it, but don't necessarily know, depending on what stage they're at. And then, it's a whole different experience, as going through it when I had no idea what my mom, there was a lot to learn. And I'm not far from an expert, but what I would have known, before would have been very beneficial there. So there's no doubt about that. So, Chris, obviously you've got an immense amount of experience in the field here. But today, more importantly, the reason you're here is to tell your story about your current situation. Yes. So if you want to share with where you are at today, obviously former owner of home helpers and that, but where you're at physically, mentally, I'd love if you could share your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important to share it because I sold my business in 21. And then my wife, Carol, and I decided, there's an opportunity for us to do some traveling, and we took advantage of that and went to Europe and
rightfully
California,
so. Good for you.
I think we had earned that, and took some time off. I actually did some substitute teaching, but to keep my mind fresh. And then we relocated into Bloomingdale, which is where we live now. But I would say it was probably late 2023. Something weird started to happen. And I was smelling something that nobody else smelled. The actual scientific word or medical word is phantosmia, okay? Hallucinogenic smell. And a little bit of ammonia, a little bit of fresh air. And my wife didn't smell it. When I visited someone's home, they didn't smell it. It was odd, okay? And that went on for 3-4 months. At the same time, I was starting to feel a little bit of a memory issue, but I quickly said, well, I'm getting older, that's kind of normal. So when I had a doctor's visit in the spring of 24, I asked him about it, and he said, well, that's a little unusual. Could be anything from sinus infection to something more serious. So let's start the process of figuring it out. So over the course of...
This would be your general practitioner.
My general practitioner.
Okay.
I give him credit because he didn't just blow it off. He said, but let's follow a path, take some antibiotics. If that doesn't work, go to an ENT. And I did those things. At the same time, he said, because he knew that it takes a while to get it, he said, and let's just check the other box and get you a neuropsych exam. Okay. Now, that took me 8 months to wait for. Okay. So in the meantime, we checked off all the other boxes, and nothing indicated that I had a problem. And so I did the neuropsych test, because now I was still having the smell, but now beginning to have a few more cognitive issues. And it was a great process. I went to Thompson Memory, 4-hour experience where they really compare you against people your age and how you are cognitively. And I came out of that in early 25, like February, March, with them saying I had some type of mild cognitive disorder, because they weren't doing nothing physical. It was all, psychological testing. Okay, and with that in there, they mentioned that it could be some kind of dementia. It could be vascular, could be Alzheimer's, might not be, but you should see a neurologist. So then I started on the path with the neurologists. And the initial neurologist I used, he was pretty thorough, even though when I went into the office, I didn't present like somebody with Alzheimer's, because of most people's impressions that oftentimes someone walks in that office and they're already into it, right? And it's pretty visible with their memory and how they speak and handle themselves. So he wasn't certain that was the issue, but he was very diligent about ordering all the testing. So I went through PET scan, CT, EEG, sleep study, because I was asking all the questions and was prepared. And that's the important lesson I learned, is you have to ask questions to the doctors. And I learned that way back when I was the young guy coming out of school and calling on doctors, that they don't know everything, right? And they're great people, and I'm not knocking doctors, but you have to ask questions. You have to make challenges. You don't want to assume that everything they say is the correct path. So I kept asking those questions, and we did all these tests, and ultimately they began to see that there were some indications that there was a risk for Alzheimer's, so that risk grew, from 0% to maybe 25, 30%. And then I was moved to a specialist in dementia with the same Northwest Neurology. And that's when they dug deeper. Again, that neurologist wasn't certain that I had it because I wasn't presenting, but she understood my concerns based on the other risk factors. And she did something with a lumbar puncture, which is relatively new. I didn't even know about that, where they could do a chemical test. It wasn't an observational test. It was a chemical test. And that's when she said, well, you're probably in that 80 percentile, maybe 90 percentile, that you're not there yet, but it's evident, okay? And so after that diagnosis is when we had to make some decisions. So it was about a 2-year process of coming from just thinking something was wrong, with my smell, to understanding, that I had something that I had a challenge with. But I think, with the support of my wife and with the questions that we were asking the doctors and challenging, it was a difference maker, because it could have taken years longer had we not been pressing for answers.
I think it's phenomenal. Number one, before we get any deeper, the fact that you're willing to share your story, I don't want to take that for granted at all. So I truly appreciate that. And it's just, when it took 8 months to get tested, which obviously is a whole nother conversation to where we're at when it comes to, unfortunately, the medical field. And I can just tell you a personal experience of somebody who reached out to me, and they were, I forget what it was, they were like 4 months out.
Right.
And thankfully, now where we're at with our nonprofit, I was able to make one phone call and get that person in the following week to get tested, which was huge, because when that person was way farther down the path than you are, and I just want to make that to be known. Chris sits here today, and with this isn't something visual that you can see that Chris Mayer, that Alzheimer's is, going on, which is part of what's scary about the disease as a whole. But the other part is way too many people find out way too late, and especially where we're at today, which you're going to get into, I know. It's amazing where we're at, and we're not there yet by any means. When I say there, there is not a cure, but what you have found out is, man, did I do a lot to ask the questions? Obviously had some really good people when it comes to the medical side of it.
Absolutely.
Maybe they didn't know the answer, but they weren't. All too often you hear the story of, hey, take some medicine and, let's see how it goes in 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 2 years. And you're continuing to just go get the prescription filled and you don't, and nothing's changing, or it's getting worse and that. So I think major shout out to the people that are on your team that have done that there, because obviously early detection is a huge part of what puts you sitting here today to tell your story. I mean, just being very transparent. If we didn't have early detection for someone like yourself, you wouldn't be able to share the story as well and eloquently as you are. So kind of hit on early detection and what that has meant for you and where you're at.
It's been huge. And it's a combination of being diligent on your part and not looking for the diagnosis that makes you happy. It's looking for the real diagnosis, okay? Because some people...
The truth hurts, and that's the truth. But
I know.
You want to know the truth, because if not, way too many people push it off and don't want to tell their family and that. So the fact that it was where you're at.
And I give credit to the specialist, Dr. Delaria, at Northwest Neurology, because even herself, she said, there's a pretty good chance, but we don't know anything for sure. I think you should see another neurologist. And she recommended me to Rush, and that's Dr. Sood. And normally, you'd have to wait a very long time. So it helped having the referral. But my little tidbit of advice to people is stay all over it. Get on waiting lists. Call the office regularly. Rush had a system where you could jump on an appointment if it got canceled. And I was being texted. And I jumped on one. So rather than waiting 6 months, I got in a month to see him. So there's ways to help, enable yourself to get in front of doctors, because, they're busy, especially the really good ones, right? And I also had
if the doctor's available tomorrow, that might be a red flag, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's it. Yes. Uh-huh.
And so I had a second opinion that was they did some additional neuropsych, and they looked at all the results, and they concurred that I was at a point where I really should consider my options, because as you know, there's options to consider. And I even had a third, because I have a great friend whose brother is a pretty well-renowned neurologist. He actually lives in Omaha. And I had conversations, my wife and I, with him on the phone, and we were sharing his results. And similarly, he concurred. He said, you're better to be aggressive and try and consider doing something, because it's really hard to predict this path you're on, because we can't predict the path you're on, if it's going to be a 2 to 3 year immediate decline or a 5 to 7 year starting decline, and how long that's going to last. So there's still this uncertainty, even with the specialists, by person, to say, here's where you're going to be 5 years from now. And so, they say that's why as soon as you need to do something about it.
So you got three opinions, which I think is huge. And that goes far from a medical expert sitting across from you. But what it comes down to is way too often people get one diagnosis, and that's a variety of things. I mean, not just Alzheimer's, but that could be a broken bone or needing surgery of any kind there. And so important to get,
I think so.
Get it, they're experts for a reason, but obviously they're not perfect.
That's correct.
There, and when you get three, you feel like there's some validity behind what they're telling you.
Absolutely.
And the other side of it, when you mentioned it already, but people who don't know, what this looks like for every person is very different. And there is and that would be the hardest part for those neurologists. What the path is different for everybody. Our hope here is that Chris lives for a very long time, and he got it early detection. He's doing all the things that he's going to talk about. And that can be very different for some people who have a rapid decline, and then there's people who live with this for 15, 20 years, we see. So it really does depend, which makes it even harder on the neurologist to, do or give you their advice. With the advice you've gotten, you've done a lot with it. So I'll let you talk about what you've done with it.
Well, what I've done with it is a couple of things. I've certainly come to the recognition, and I was partly there, that there are things that you can do yourself, okay? In terms of your diet, the neurologist suggested the Mediterranean diet. It's a brain diet. It's really healthy for your brain. And even though you might be in some level of decline, you're not limiting that, by a poor diet. And exercise, try and move. Moving is good, even if you can't exercise, if you're not sitting for long periods of time and moving around and staying flexible and keeping your body moving. Social activity is huge. I saw many times with our clients where they didn't want to go to a community, which I completely understand, but they really didn't want to leave the house either. So we did things to motivate them to get out of the house and move around and go to a social club or go to a senior center and interact with other people. Very good for your mind, very good for your mental health in terms of warding off dementia. And then there's intellectual exercises you can do. Word games. I ran into this thing called Brain HQ, which is a great way of measuring all different types of your intellectual properties and providing games to you on an app that will exercise your brain, okay? And it's frustrating sometimes, but it's also challenging and fun, so find something that you can do with your brain, and that might be playing games too. And, in my personal life too, I think spiritually, I have faith, and that's helped me a lot to understand the meaning of things and to progress that way. So that's kind of things you can do for yourself. One more would be is have plans in place for when things start getting bad. I learned a lot from my home care business that things like long-term care insurance and having living wills and things like this should all be in place while you're still fully cognitive and can discuss that with your spouse if you have one and your family, and be prepared. Okay. But then I started investigating and understanding the medical things that could be done, because very little of this existed when I had my home care business. I mean, most of this has come into 2023, 2024. Right. Very recent kinds of things that I didn't know much about. So you have to do your due diligence on the options. And
before you get into the medical side, I just want to recap what you said, because I think that's really good stuff there. I think, and you said it at the end, but challenge yourself, and I take that on a couple of different, or all the things you mentioned. Challenge yourself. Not a lot of people. I shouldn't say not a lot of people. Not everyone wants to eat and change their diet, but that's a challenge to yourself.
Right.
Challenge yourself. You mentioned movement, not just exercise. Just moving around is different than not asking you to go to the gym for an hour. This is movement is huge. And then challenge yourself when it comes to that socialization aspect, because not everyone wants to do that, because they might feel, they don't want to say it, but they feel off, concerned with what they might say, or their family might feel the same way in that. And then obviously challenging yourself from a mental side of it, there is huge, because the brain activity, if there is no activity, then it can get worse very quickly. Right. And we've had multiple people come on. We've had a couple different attorneys and financial planners come on the podcast in the past. So it's good to hear you mention that, because that side of that piece can be, no matter what we have in place or what we're thinking and not thinking, having planning done can be the difference between it may not help you personally, but what can it do for your family and your estate and all those different things. So really appreciate you mentioning that. So talk about the medical side of it.
Okay. Well, so, with some due diligence I was doing and dialogue with the doctors, there are still drugs that you can just temper some of the symptoms, like Aricept and others. But I was looking for more than that. I wanted to address the disease. And so, the main options that are out there now that are relatively new are drugs that attack the amyloids and tau, that is creating the plaques and tangles in your brain and basically shrinking it. There's two options. There's a drug called Consula, if I got that right. That's a monthly infusion for a year, and that's proven to reduce the growth, or I should say, slow down the progression. Okay.
Of those plaques.
And tangles,
right.
And in some case remove them.
Right.
And similarly with lecanemab, which is the one I've chosen to take, that's more aggressive in terms of every 2 weeks, so biweekly infusions, possibly for the rest of your life, but potentially after maybe 12 to 14 months, if it's showing progress, going to once a month. And maybe even an injectable is on the way down the road, so you don't have to go into an infusion clinic. That similarly attacks the plaques and tangles, and in some cases can remove all of it, but the damage has kind of been done, so you can't stop it. But I've chosen that one partly because for me genetically, and this is where you want to be asking your doctor, each of those might have different side effects or more risk depending on your genetic makeup that you've had in the blood testing. So ask those questions about which one is safer for you. And the consensus of the three neurologists was, for me, lecanemab was safer. And so I've now, and when you're having this procedure, every three visits for the first 12 months, they do an MRI before you get your infusion, mostly to make sure that you're not having some of the side effects, okay?
Fair.
Because there's a physical thing that could happen in your brain that they're keeping an eye on. And you then keep proceeding if you're not having any visible things, and if you're not experiencing things like heavy-duty headaches or fatigue, which I haven't. I'm feeling great. Everything is going well. Then you just continue with that process.
Well, no, that's it's great to hear that there's something more. That's like you said, within the last probably four-ish years
Right.
or so.
Yeah.
That this is.
It's amazing, and I guess the hope it gives to me is that there's more being done. So for anybody who's considering, something aggressive like infusion, the hope is that maybe that isn't a forever thing. Maybe something else happens in the next whenever that says, now we can do more. We can switch you from this drug to this therapy, okay? And so, in my personal opinion, sure, I want to slow it down, but you also have to think about your family and what this disease, how that impacts them. And being aggressive and trying to battle this thing is good for your family too, and because they're going to have more time to create those memories and more time to be with you. And I just think it's the right thing to do for someone who has a family to try and attack it this way.
You know what? I give you major kudos. It's the most unselfish way to look at this, which is, and obviously you love your family, so that's why you look at that. But many people who are going through something, it's selfish that they're thinking about themselves, which I know you're thinking about yourself.
Of course.
Number one, and you should, but number two, a very close second, is your family. So that's awesome to hear you say that. And when you talk about it, if you want, Sharon, how long have you been now taking, you're going in those infusions and that?
So I just was on my fourth infusion, and I've had one MRI, and I'll get the fifth one next week. So that would be 10 weeks of infusion therapy, and I'll get another MRI on that one.
Okay.
And the only restriction is that I have to be back at this infusion clinic every 2 weeks for a while. So any travel plans have to work around that, okay, which we're doing. We're making trips, 10-day trips if we want to travel, because that's acceptable. And, and they're incredible at the infusion clinic. They're extremely caring and wonderful, and know what they're trying to do there to help you, and it's a welcoming experience. So Yeah, I mean, nobody likes to have a needle put in them, right? But if it's done properly and professionally and with care, it's something you can deal with. So yeah, I'm only part way in, have a long way to go, but so far so good. I've been very blessed.
It's awesome. No, not everyone loves needles, but
Right.
what you're doing this for is for your life, and you want your life to be as great as possible into the future. So I'm not a needle fan, but I guarantee if that was the option, you have this or that.
Yeah.
We're gonna suck it up, and
Right.
you're gonna.
And I haven't experienced any pain.
Good.
And no discomfort. It's been no different really than going and getting blood tests, just longer.
Perfect. No, it's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
No, that's great to hear that there. So awesome to hear that you're on a path. You're doing things, and you're definitely not just waiting on the sideline, which is amazing to hear. So, Chris, I kind of let the floor will be yours here as we begin to wrap up. Anything else you want to share? You're in my eyes somebody that I just truly appreciate you coming on, telling your story, because I know you're doing a great job, but it's not easy. So
thank you.
Appreciate that. But the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, for anyone who is having questions about their neurological issue, I would say be aggressive. Ask questions. Don't take no for an answer, and keep pursuing it until you're pretty satisfied that the testing has either has eliminated this as a possibility for you. And for families, I say always seek support, whether it's through the Alzheimer's Association or a local organization like Lost Souls. Seek support and counsel because it's a long path and it's a difficult path to care for someone with Alzheimer's. And there's lots of things that you're challenged with. You're challenged with an emotional component, an intellectual component, a physical component when you're a caregiving family. And the more support you can have, whether it's in groups or with or through professionals, you need to stay strong because, as I used to tell my clients, this is not a sprint; it's a marathon. So be prepared. Take care of yourself. Get caregivers. Sometimes it's hard to afford, so have a rotating system in your family if you can't afford the caregivers to give the spouse a break and keep them mentally healthy. And I guess if you have faith, use it because it's nice to have that behind you as well. Be strong and recognize that there's still something at this point in your life where I'm at, where it's not like you should look at yourself on the downhill. You're still climbing the mountain. You still have something to accomplish, and don't give up. And don't give up on yourself, and stay strong.
I often say it, whatever faith it is that people believe in, like whoever that person, spiritual, whatever it is for you as a human. It really comes down to the cards you're dealt. The belief that you should have is you're only dealt the cards that you're able to handle. Right. Why was it you? That's not for you to decide. Just like when it was my mom and we were sitting there going, well, why us? Why did this happen when she was 56 years old to be diagnosed? And that why? Well, we don't. That's not for me to figure out. But you're dealt the hand you're dealt for a reason, and may not feel that way, but you're supposed to be able to deal with it there. And what I hope is, Chris, we can as this podcast continues, I'd love to check back in with you, have you back on to see hopefully some really positive information that you're able to share as to where you're at. And the fact that you look at this as you're still climbing up the hill when so many people who are in the position you're in are not looking at it that way. So mindset is everything. If you don't believe it, it's really not going to happen. That's something I live by in my daily life. So
good for you, man.
Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you taking time. As I mentioned, we're looking forward to having Chris back in the podcast studio in the future to share where he is at, because I can't thank him enough for his willingness to come on with where he is currently And the hope is that he's got all positive news to share as he continues to go through treatment and infusions and that. So, Chris, thank you again for being here.
You're welcome, man. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
As always, if you want more information about Lost Souls, you can visit us online. You can visit us through any of our socials, whether it be Facebook or Instagram. And if you want to, I'm sure Chris would be more than willing. We'd be happy to connect anybody who would like to have a conversation with Chris, as he's nodding his head, so I appreciate that. And as we wrap up, as always, this is a monthly podcast, and I would love to connect with anybody who may be a good fit, whether it's someone who has a connection to Alzheimer's, is dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia in an Alzheimer's support role, or strictly anyone who's got a business that really believes in memory care and philanthropy. So please don't hesitate to reach out on that. In closing, thank you for joining us today on Remembering Together, the LMJ's Lost Souls podcast. I can say that without a doubt the information shared today was not only beneficial and impactful, but just truly from the heart. So I can't thank Chris enough for being here. And in closing, love your family, love your friends, and remember to cherish the time you spend with the ones you love, because at the end of the day, all we do have is memories. Thank you.